Well, well, well. The 1999 Royal Rumble. Yeah. Okie dokie. How do I go about this one? The show was odd. It was different, but it does have a legendary match in there. Unfortunately, it's not the actual Royal Rumble match, which was unique for entirely different reasons. Sorry. Here's the backdrop. 1998 was a huge year for the WWF. They took over the ratings supremacy against WCW. The Austin McMahon rivalry was the hottest thing maybe ever in professional wrestling, and they were tearing shit up, and the WWF was white hot at this time. There's no question about it. There were two primary feuds heading into this show that mattered above all else. That was Rock and Mankind, and then Vince and Stone Cold. And you saw that play out here at the end of the show. Get through some of the other stuff. You've got Boss Man defeating Road Dogg in the opening match, Ken Shamrock retaining his IC title against badass Billy Gunn. You have X-Pac defeating Gangrel and retaining his European Championship. You have Sable beating Luna Vachon with Shane McMahon in her corner to retain the Women's Championship. Now I've gotten through all the bullshit. And I don't mean to demean anybody that was actually on that show up to that point in time. But to me, I'll always remember this show as a two-match show and a two feud show. And that's really what it was. And maybe that's why I don't look back as fondly on the 1999 Royal Rumble nearly as much as I do the 1998 Royal Rumble. But it's classic in its own way. First, keep in mind that we later found out that the 1999 Royal Rumble was being covered by the documentary series Beyond the Mat, which was a big success at the time, but was also quite a bit controversial in the way it presented a lot of different things. The WWF originally backed the project, and then when it got closer to the time for the project to be done, and the WWF realized what it was going to do, they started to back off. They weren't going to promote it, they weren't going to plug it anymore, and they were starting to really regret their involvement in this whole thing. Now, of course, you had people like Stone Cold that didn't want anything to do with it, but Mankind was one of the key components of that documentary being able to go, and he really let people in behind the scenes to see what really goes on and to find out a little bit more about Mick Foley. Anyways, we get to the point here. The WWF Championship match was the second to last match on the show. And it should have been because it was the second hottest feud in the company at the time. Obviously, Austin and McMahon in the Royal Rumble match had to main event this show. But The Rock and Mankind, this goes back to Survivor Series 98, where Mick Foley was trying to position himself as an acceptable, appropriate corporate champion. And then Rock ultimately gets help from the corporation and becomes the corporate champion. And it begins a whole series of events between these two guys that was absolutely phenomenal. This here was an I Quit match. And a really good match, and it's even more compelling when you're able to go watch Beyond the Mat and you see them talk about, for fans like us that love to hear the talk about the spots and how they piece together the match, how they're playing the match. When you see the footage of them talking about how they're going to go up here and do this spot and how they're going to do that spot, and it shows a little bit about the Rock maybe, and this was a knock against him sometimes, that he would take some liberties with his opponents. Maybe he was only supposed to hit you with the chair once or twice, and he hit you repeatedly over and over and over again. Well, this was a really, really damn good match. It really was one of my favorite non-Rumble Royal Rumble pay-per-view matches of all time. Finish was great too. Mick Foley, Mankind's laid out unconscious, and then he screams out the words, I quit, because Shane McMahon played a dub over from early in the night on Sunday Night Heat, where Mankind said he was going to have The Rock screaming, I quit, I quit, I quit. This, of course, was not the end of the feud. A little bit later, I remember Halftime Heat during that year's Super Bowl. You remember that? It did like 8+ million viewers at halftime of the Super Bowl. It was a 20-minute time limit, empty arena match. Oh, man. Those were great times. Those were fun times. That's when the WWF is doing all types of crazy shit outside of the box. And this was a phenomenal feud between these two. The chemistry between Rock and Mankind, I thought, was truly something else. And it's amazing to me as you go back and look at it, as 1999 played out, in end of 98, into 99, Mankind was putting The Rock on the map as a real deal big star. And he was getting a lot out of him that way. And then when it came time to turn the Rock face and you had to add a different element to him, maybe a slightly softer element to him where people were going to like him, here comes Mankind again with the Rock and Sock connection and, helps get him over in an entirely different way and makes him an even bigger star. Mankind, Mick Foley, was incredibly instrumental in the development of The Rock into a legit WWF main eventer and a legit top guy and into one of the biggest stars that the business has ever seen or will ever see, period. And then we get to the main event of the night, which was the Royal Rumble match. And you knew going into this, into the buildup of it, when you've got the vignettes of Shane and Vince doing these cheap ass Rambo Rocky rip-offs, excuse me. Where Vince is chasing the chickens and he's pulling the sled, doing running through the snow and all this other shit. How bad you want Austin? How bad? They were going to enter 1 and 2, and you knew how somehow back then, some way, that these two guys were just going to dominate the whole fucking Rumble, especially with Austin and Vince being involved. Now, what I was thinking back at that time, as we went into the 1999 Royal Rumble, I'm like, well, Austin's got to win this. Are they really going to have him win 3 in a row, though? But Austin's got to win this because you got to be setting the table for either him and Mankind or him and The Rock at WrestleMania 15. You would assume him and The Rock. But I didn't quite know how they were going to get there, and I missed those times in the WWF where it made me wonder and they made me think how they were going to get to a certain point. Even if I knew maybe what their final destination was going to be, I had no idea how they were going to get there. But so many times they pieced it together so well. And this Rumble here, you could pretty much skip it. Because Austin enters 1, Vince enters 2, and they do everything except fight in the ring predominantly. And the action in the ring and the Rumble itself is really playing second fiddle to Austin and McMahon. At one point in time, McMahon joins the commentary team. And then ultimately, at the end of the match, The Rock helps interfere on Vince's behalf, and eventually Vince is able, after he gets stunned, he's eventually able to get back to his feet, and he eliminates Austin. And then Vince McMahon wins the 1999 Royal Rumble. How awesome it was. And I will totally justify and defend this booking decision because Vince, in my opinion, was the most important star of the Attitude Era, the truly biggest star of the Attitude Era, the best star of the Attitude Era. He was the top guy. Everybody funneled off of Vince. Everybody played off of Vince. Vince was the man, not Austin, not The Rock. I know that upsets a lot of Austin and Rock fans, but the truth of the matter remains is Vince McMahon was the biggest and most important star of the Attitude Era. So why not have him win the 1999 Royal Rumble? Of course, at that time, I had no clue why they would have Vince win the Royal Rumble if The Rock was the champion. I'm like, he's the corporate champ. How are they going to get here? So, of course, this set up a whole series of events going into the St. Valentine's Day Massacre pay-per-view the next month, and that set a lot of the things into motion for WrestleMania 15. But again, it was a crazy, crazy pay-per-view, a crazy Royal Rumble match, and a crazy finish. 1999 was a crazy time in the WWF. They were pushing all types of boundaries. They were doing all types of weird, odd, crazy, awesome shit. And that's the best thing I can say about this show, frankly. Not one of the best Rumble pay-per-views of all time, ladies and gentlemen. But you know what? If anything else, you could skip through the first 4 matches and just go to the last 2, and that'll give you enough history of the WWF. That's all you really need to watch. And you could probably skip through most of the Rumble match itself.